The dust kicked up by Sarah's horse settled. Slowly in the evening air, as she approached the small town of Cedar Ridge, her father's letter had been urgent, asking her to come home immediately. After 3 years studying in Boston, she had almost forgotten how different life was in the West. The buildings looked smaller, the streets dustier, and everything seemed to move at a slower pace than the busy city she had grown accustomed to. Sarah dismounted her horse outside the general store and tied the reins to the wooden post. Her traveling dress was covered in dust, and her dark hair had escaped from its careful arrangement. She looked nothing like the proper Boston lady she had tried so hard to become. As she brushed the dust from her skirts, she noticed a group of men standing near the saloon across the street. They were talking in low voices, their hands resting on their gun belts. One man stood apart from the others. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black hat pulled low over his eyes. Something about the way he carried himself made Sarah feel uneasy. When he turned slightly, she caught a glimpse of his face. He had sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. There was a dangerous quality about him that made her heart beat faster, though she could not say why. The man seemed to sense her watching him. His head turned in her direction, and their eyes met across the dusty street. For a moment, neither of them moved. Sarah felt as though he could see right through her, past all the layers of proper behavior she had learned. In Boston, she quickly looked away, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Sarah Mitchell, is that really you?" She turned to see Tom Bradley, the sheriff's son, walking toward her with a wide smile. Tom had been her childhood friend before she left for Boston. He looked older now, more serious, with a badge pinned to his shirt. "Tom, how wonderful to see you," Sarah said, genuinely pleased to see a familiar face. "You're a deputy now?" "That's right. Been keeping the peace around here while you were off becoming a city lady." His smile faded slightly. "Though I have to say, these aren't the best times to be coming home. We've had some trouble lately." Sarah glanced back toward the group of men by the saloon, but the tall stranger had disappeared. "What kind of trouble?" Tom's expression grew serious. "Cattle rustlers mostly. They've been hitting the big ranches hard. Your father's lost some stock too. That's probably why he asked you to come home." Sarah's heart sank. Her father owned one of the smaller ranches outside town. If he was losing cattle, it could mean serious financial trouble for their family. "How bad is it, Tom?" "Bad enough that most folks are scared to travel alone after dark. The gang seems to know everyone's movements. Some people think they have help from someone in town." Tom lowered his voice. "That man you were looking at earlier? The one in the black hat? His name's Jake Sullivan. He rode into town about 2 months ago, right around the time the troubles started." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think he's involved?" "Can't prove anything yet, but I don't trust him. He's too smooth, too careful. Never seems to do any honest work, but he always has money for the saloon and the hotel. You'd best stay away from him, Sarah. He's not the kind of man a proper lady should know." As if summoned by their conversation, Jake Sullivan stepped out of the saloon. He moved with the fluid grace of a man comfortable with danger. His dark eyes found Sarah immediately, and this time she forced herself not to look away. There was something challenging in his gaze, something that made her feel rebellious against all the proper behavior she had learned. "I should get home," Sarah said, though she found it difficult to tear her attention away from the mysterious stranger. "Father will be worried. I'll ride with you," Tom offered. "It's not safe for a woman to travel alone these days." They collected Sarah's horse and began the ride to the Mitchell Ranch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Sarah had forgotten how beautiful the western sunsets could be. Boston had its charms, but nothing compared to the vast open spaces and dramatic landscapes of her childhood home. The ranch house looked smaller than she remembered, and she could see that it needed repairs. The fence around the main corral had several broken boards, and the barn roof was missing some shingles. Her father, John Mitchell, came out to greet them. He looked older and more tired than when she had left for Boston. "Sarah, my girl," embraced her warmly. "I'm so glad you're home safe." "Tom, thank you for bringing her." "Just doing my job, Mr. Mitchell," Tom replied. "I'll be heading back to town now." "Sarah, remember what I told you about staying close to home?" After Tom left, Sarah sat with her father on the front porch. The evening air was cool and filled with the sounds of insects and distant cattle. Her father explained the troubles they had been facing. Cattle were disappearing in the night, and there seemed to be no pattern to the thefts. The rustlers were clever and left few tracks. "I'm thinking of selling the ranch," her father said quietly, "maybe moving to town where it's safer. I'm getting too old for this kind of worry." Sarah felt her heart break. This ranch had been in their family for 20 years. Her mother was buried in the small cemetery on the hill behind the house. Selling it would mean losing everything that connected them to her memory. "Don't make any decisions yet, father," Sarah said. "Maybe things will improve. Maybe the sheriff will catch these rustlers soon." As they talked, Sarah found her thoughts. Returning to the stranger she had seen in town, Jake Sullivan. Even his name sounded dangerous. Tom had warned her to stay away from him, but something about the man intrigued her. Perhaps it was the way he had looked at her, as if he could see past all her proper Boston manners to the wild Western girl she used to be. That night, Sarah lay in her childhood bedroom. She listened to the sounds of the ranch. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard the soft lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the prairie grass. But she also heard something else, the sound of hoofbeats in the distance, moving fast across the range. She went to her window and peered out into the moonlit landscape, but saw nothing except shadows and silver grass moving in the breeze. Sleep was long in coming, and when it finally arrived, her dreams were filled with dark eyes and dangerous smiles. Sarah woke before dawn to the sound of her father shouting outside. She quickly dressed and ran from the house to find him standing near the main corral, his face pale with anger and worry. 20 head of their best cattle were missing, and the gate hung open like a mouth gaping in surprise. "They came in the night," her father said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Took them right from under our noses. We didn't hear a thing." Sarah examined the ground around the corral. The earth was torn up by many hooves, but the tracks seemed to lead in several different directions before disappearing on the hard-packed ground near the creek. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. "We'll have to report this to the sheriff," Sarah said, though she could see in her father's eyes that he had little hope of getting the cattle back. They rode to town together, and Sarah found herself scanning the streets for any sign of Jake Sullivan. She told herself it was only natural curiosity, but her heart quickened when she spotted his black hat outside the hotel. He was sitting on a chair tilted back against the wall, apparently sleeping in the morning sun. But something about his posture suggested he was more alert than he appeared. Sheriff Bradley listened to their report with a grim expression. He was a good man, but getting older, and the recent troubles had worn him down. He promised to form a search party, though they all knew the chances of finding the missing cattle were slim. As they left the sheriff's office, Sarah noticed Jake Sullivan watching them from across the street. This time, instead of looking away, she met his gaze directly. A slow smile spread across his face, and he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been respectful, if not for the mocking glint in his eyes. "Sarah," her father said, noticing the direction of her attention, "that man has been asking questions about you around town." "What kind of questions?" "About where you've been when you came back, whether you're spoken for." Her father's voice carried a warning. "Tom Bradley says he's not to be trusted." Despite the warning, Sarah found herself thinking about Jake Sullivan throughout the day. There was something about him that drew her attention like a moth to flame. Maybe it was because he represented everything her proper Boston education had taught her to avoid. Or maybe it was simply that he looked at her as though she were still the wild ranch girl she had been before she left for the city. That evening, as Sarah helped her father with the evening chores, she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Her father reached for his rifle, but it was only Tom Bradley, riding hard and looking worried. "More trouble," Tom said, dismounting quickly. "The Peterson ranch was hit last night too. They lost 30 head, and this time there was a witness." Sarah felt her heart skip. What did they see? Old Pete's grandson was sleeping in the barn. He saw at least 6 men, all wearing bandanas over their faces. But he said one of them was giving orders, and his voice sounded familiar. "Pete thinks It might have been someone from town. Her father shook his head sadly. If it's someone we know, someone we trust, then we're all in danger. How can we protect our stock if the enemy is among us? Tom agreed to stay for dinner, and they spent the evening discussing ways to protect the remaining cattle. Sarah found herself only half listening to their conversation. Her mind kept wandering to Jake Sullivan and the way he had smiled at her that morning. There had been something in that smile that made her feel reckless and alive in a way she had not felt since returning from Boston. After Tom left, Sarah helped her father secure the ranch for the night. They checked all the gates twice and made sure the remaining cattle were in the corral closest to the house. As they worked, Sarah noticed her father moving slowly, favoring his left leg. The recent stress was taking a toll on his health. "Father, maybe you should consider Tom's offer. To help guard the ranch," Sarah suggested. "Tom's a good boy, but he has his duties in town. Besides, if we can't protect our own property, what's the point of keeping it?" That night, Sarah lay awake listening to every sound outside her window. Around midnight, she heard something that made her sit up in bed. It was the soft sound of a horse moving slowly past the house. She crept to her window and peered out into the darkness. A lone rider sat motionless on his horse about 50 yards from the house. In the moonlight, she could just make out the shape of a man in a dark hat. Her heart began to race. Was it one of the rustlers, scouting for another raid? Should she wake her father? As she watched, the rider turned his horse and began to move away. Before he disappeared into the shadows, he looked back toward her window. Even in the darkness, Sarah felt as though their eyes met. A moment later, he was gone. Leaving only the whisper of wind through the grass, the next morning brought news that made the entire situation more complicated. Tom rode out early to tell them that Jake Sullivan had been seen at the saloon until nearly dawn, playing cards with several witnesses. If the mysterious rider Sarah had seen was connected to the cattle rustling, it could not have been Jake. "Maybe I was wrong about him," Tom admitted reluctantly, "but I still don't trust him. There's something about that man that doesn't sit right with me." Sarah said nothing about the midnight rider she had seen. Something told her to keep that information to herself, at least for now. Instead, she asked Tom about the other strangers who had been in town recently. "There's been a few drifters passing through," Tom said, "but most of them move on quickly. Jake Sullivan is the only one who's stayed. Says he's looking to buy some land and settle down, but he never seems to actually look at any property." Tom left. Sarah decided to ride to town for supplies. Her father was not feeling well and had decided to rest for the day. As she rode down the main street, she saw Jake Sullivan coming out of the bank. He saw her at the same time and walked directly toward her horse. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "I was sorry to hear about your troubles." Sarah looked down at him from her horse, trying to maintain her composure despite the way her heart was racing. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not completely black as she had thought, but a very dark brown with flecks of gold. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," she said formally, "though I'm surprised you know my name." His smile was slow and confident. A beautiful woman returns to a small town after years away. "Of course, people talk." He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'd like to call on you sometime, if your father would permit it." Sarah felt her cheeks burning. No man had ever been so direct with her, not even the proper Boston gentleman she had known. "I'm afraid that wouldn't be appropriate, Mr. Sullivan. We don't really know anything about you." "Then perhaps we should remedy that," he said. "I'll be at the church social this Saturday night. Maybe we could become better acquainted." Before Sarah could respond, he touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving her sitting on her horse in the middle of the street, her heart pounding and her mind spinning with confusion. She had come home to the safety and simplicity of ranch life, but instead she had found danger and mystery in the form of a man whose very presence made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. The church social arrived with the kind of perfect autumn evening that made the western sky look like a painting. Sarah stood before her mirror, trying to decide what to wear. She had brought several fashionable dresses from Boston, but they seemed too formal for a small-town gathering. Finally, she chose a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her father was feeling better, and had agreed to attend the social. Though Sarah suspected he was more interested in discussing ranch business with the other men than in socializing. As they approached the church, Sarah could hear music and laughter coming from inside. The whole town seemed to be there. She felt nervous about seeing people she had known as a child. Inside, the church had been decorated with corn stalks and pumpkins. Tables lined the walls, loaded with food prepared by the women of the town. A small group of musicians played fiddle music in one corner, and couples were already dancing. Sarah recognized many faces, though everyone looked older than she remembered. Sarah Mitchell, look how grown up and beautiful you are. She turned to see Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, approaching with a warm smile. Soon Sarah was surrounded by women eager to hear about her time in Boston. They peppered her with questions about city fashions and society life, and Sarah found herself enjoying the attention. But even as she chatted with old friends and neighbors, her eyes kept scanning the room. Where was Jake Sullivan? Had he changed his mind about coming? She told herself she was merely curious, but her heart sank a little when she did not see him anywhere. Tom Bradley appeared at her elbow, looking handsome in his best shirt and jacket. "Would you care to dance, Sarah?" he asked politely. Sarah accepted, and they joined the other couples on the makeshift dance floor. Tom was a good dancer, and they moved well together. As they spun around the room, Sarah caught glimpses of her father talking seriously with some of the other ranchers. Their faces were grim, and she knew they were discussing the recent cattle thefts. "You look beautiful tonight," Tom said as they danced. "I've missed having you here." Sarah smiled at him. Tom was a good man, dependable and honest, the kind of man her father would approve of, the kind of man she should be interested in. But as they danced, her eyes continued to search the room. For a tall figure in a black hat, the song ended, and Tom was leading her back to the refreshment table when the church door opened. Jake Sullivan walked in, and conversations seemed to pause all around the room. He had cleaned up for the occasion, trading his usual dusty clothes for a black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist. His dark hair was neatly combed, but there was still something dangerous and untamed about him. Jake's eyes found Sarah immediately across the crowded room. He smiled that slow, confident smile that made her heart race, then began walking toward her. She felt Tom stiffen beside her. "Evening, Miss Mitchell," Jake said when he reached them. He nodded politely to Tom. "Deputy Sullivan," Tom replied curtly. Jake's attention returned to Sarah. "I was hoping you might honor me with a dance." Sarah felt every eye in the room watching them. She knew she should politely decline. A proper lady would never dance with a man of questionable reputation. But something rebellious stirred inside her, something that had been sleeping during her years of proper behavior in Boston. "I would be delighted," she heard herself say. Tom's face darkened, but he could hardly make a scene in the middle of the church social. Jake offered Sarah his arm, and she allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor, just as the musicians began a slower waltz. Being in Jake's arms was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. He was a surprisingly good dancer, leading her with confident ease around the floor. But it was more than his skill that affected her. There was something electric about his touch, something that made her feel alive and dangerous. "You dance very well for a man who claims to be looking at ranch property," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice light. Jake's eyes sparkled with amusement. "I'm a man of many talents, Miss Mitchell. Perhaps you'd like to discover what some of the others are." Sarah felt her cheeks burn at the implications of his words. "That's hardly appropriate conversation for a church social, Mr. Sullivan." "Me," he said, though he did not look particularly sorry. "It's just that you don't seem like the type of woman who's content with appropriate conversation." "And what type of woman do you think I am?" Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her face as they moved to the music. "I think you're a woman who's been pretending to be something she's not for so long that she's almost forgotten who she really is." His words hit closer to the truth than Sarah was comfortable with. "You don't know anything about me, don't I?" Jake's voice was low, meant only for her ears. "I know you grew up wild on this ranch, riding horses and helping with cattle roundups. I know you learned to shoot and rope and do things that would horrify those Boston ladies you've been trying to imitate. And I know that underneath all those proper manners, you're still that wild ranch girl." Sarah stared at him, shocked by his words. How could he know so much about her past? Who told you those things? People talk, Jake said with a shrug, especially about someone as interesting as you. The song ended, but Jake did not immediately release her. For a moment they stood very close together in the middle of the dance floor, and Sarah felt as though everyone else in the room had disappeared. She was aware of nothing but Jake's dark eyes and the warmth of his hands, where they touched her. Then reality crashed back as she heard her father's voice calling her name. She stepped away from Jake, her heart pounding, and turned to see her father approaching with a stern expression. "Sarah, I think it's time we headed home," her father said firmly. "Of course, father." Sarah looked back at Jake. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Sullivan." "The pleasure was mine," Jake said with that dangerous smile. "I hope we'll have the opportunity to dance again soon." As Sarah walked away with her father, she could feel Jake's eyes following her. She also noticed that many of the other townspeople were watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Dancing with Jake Sullivan had definitely caused talk. On the ride home, her father was unusually quiet. Finally, as they approached the ranch, he spoke. "Sarah, I don't want you encouraging that man's attention. I only danced with him once, father. It was enough to set tongues wagging. Jake Sullivan is not the kind of man you should associate with. There are rumors about his past, and his presence here coincides too closely with our troubles." Sarah wanted to defend Jake, though she could not say why. "Tom said he was at the saloon all night when we were robbed. Maybe so, but that doesn't mean he's not involved somehow. Promise me you'll stay away from him." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Finally she said, "I promise to be careful, father." It was not exactly the promise he had asked for, but it seemed to satisfy him. As they settled the horses for the night, Sarah found herself thinking about Jake's words. Had she been pretending to be someone she was not? In Boston, she had worked so hard to become a proper lady that maybe she had lost sight of who she really was underneath. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sarah stood at her window, looking out over the moonlit range. Somewhere out there, cattle rustlers were planning their next move. Somewhere out there, Jake Sullivan was probably thinking about their dance. And somewhere in her heart, Sarah was beginning to realize that her carefully ordered life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. She touched her lips, remembering how close Jake had stood to her during their dance, and wondered what it would be like to kiss a man like him. The thought shocked her with its boldness, but she did not push it away. Maybe it was time to stop being so proper and start being honest about what she really wanted. 3 days after the church social disaster struck the Mitchell Ranch again. This time, the rustlers took not only cattle, but also their 2 best horses, including Sarah's favorite mare, Bella. Sarah found her father sitting on the porch steps. At dawn, his head in his hands, looking utterly defeated. "They're trying to ruin us completely," he said without looking up. "First the cattle, now the horses. They know exactly what will hurt us most." Sarah sat beside him, her heart aching to see her strong father so broken. "We'll get through this." "Father, we have to with what? We've lost nearly half our stock, and now our best breeding mare is gone. The banknote comes due in 2 months, and we don't have the money to pay it." He looked at her with tired eyes. "I've made up my mind, Sarah. I'm going to accept the offer on the ranch." "What offer?" Sarah's blood went cold. "A man came by yesterday while you were in town. Said he represented some investors interested in buying ranch land. He offered a fair price, more than fair actually, enough to pay off our debts and leave us something to start over somewhere else." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. "Was this man? Did he give you his name?" Her father shook his head, said he was just a representative. "But he knew all about our troubles, knew exactly how much we owed and when payment was due. It was almost like he'd been watching us, waiting for us to get desperate enough to sell." A terrible suspicion began to form in Sarah's mind. Could the cattle rustling be connected to someone wanting to force ranchers to sell their land? It would explain why the thieves seemed to know so much about everyone's movements and vulnerabilities. "Don't sign anything yet, father," Sarah pleaded. "Give me a few days to think about this." That afternoon, Sarah rode to town with a heavy heart. She needed to talk to someone about her suspicions, but she was not sure whom to trust. Tom would be the logical choice. But something told her that going to the law might not be the right move yet, as she tied her horse outside the general store. She saw Jake Sullivan emerge from the hotel across the street. Without thinking, she found herself walking toward him. He saw her coming and smiled, but his expression grew serious when he noticed her troubled face. "Miss Mitchell, you look like you've lost your best friend," he said. "What's wrong?" Despite all the warnings she had received about Jake, Sarah found herself wanting to confide in him. There was something in his eyes that made her feel like he might actually understand. "My father is talking about selling the ranch," she said. Quietly. "The cattle rustling has ruined us financially." Jake's expression darkened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Your father's a good man. He doesn't deserve this trouble," Sarah said, using his first name without thinking. "Do you think it's possible that someone is deliberately targeting the ranchers, trying to force them to sell their land?" Jake studied her face carefully before answering. "Why would you think that?" Sarah told him about the mysterious buyer who had approached her father, though he seemed to know their exact financial situation. As she talked, she watched Jake's face, looking for any sign of guilt or recognition. But all she saw was concern and what looked like anger on her behalf. "That's very interesting," Jake said when she finished, "and very suspicious. Have any of the other ranchers mentioned similar offers?" "I don't know. I was hoping to find out." It was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing some important decision. Finally, he spoke. "Sarah, would you trust me if I told you there are things about this situation that you don't understand?" "What kind of things?" "Things I can't explain right now. But I give you my word that I'm not your enemy. In fact, I might be one of the few people who can help you save your ranch." Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" Before Jake could answer, Tom Bradley appeared around the corner, his hand resting on his gun belt. His face was dark with anger. When he saw Sarah talking with Jake, "Sarah, what are you doing?" Tom demanded. "I thought we agreed you would stay away from this man." "We were just talking, Tom," Sarah said. Though she felt guilty for some reason, Tom turned to Jake, his voice cold and official. "Sullivan, I need you two come with me. Sheriff wants to ask you some questions." Jake's expression remained calm, but Sarah saw his body tense slightly. "What kind of questions, Deputy?" "The kind that might explain how you always seem to have money when you don't have any visible means of income. The kind that might explain why trouble seems to follow you wherever you go." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "Tom, surely you don't think Jake is involved in the rustling?" "That's exactly what I think," Tom replied. "And so does half the town." Jake looked at Sarah, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been regret. "It's all right, Sarah. I'll answer the sheriff's questions." He turned to Tom. "Lead the way, Deputy." As Jake walked away with Tom, Sarah felt as though she were losing something important, though she could not say what. She watched until they disappeared into the sheriff's office, and walked slowly back to her horse. That evening, Sarah could not concentrate on anything. She kept thinking about Jake's words, about his claim that he might be able to help save their ranch. She also thought about the look in his eyes when Tom had come to arrest him. There had been no fear there, only a kind of resigned sadness around midnight. She heard the soft sound of pebbles hitting her bedroom window. Her heart leaped as she recognized the signal boys had used to get her attention when she was younger. She crept to the window and looked out to see a dark figure standing in the shadows near the barn. Sarah quickly threw a shawl over her nightgown, slipped out of the house. The figure moved deeper into the shadows, and she followed, her bare feet silent on the grass. When she reached the barn, she found Jake Sullivan waiting for her in the darkness. "Jake, how did you get out of jail?" "They had to let me go. No evidence." His voice was low and urgent. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You're in danger, and so is your father." "What kind of danger?" Jake stepped closer to her, and in the moonlight, she could see the tension in his face. "The man who offered to buy your ranch is not what he seems. Neither are the cattle rustlers. This whole thing is bigger than anyone in town realizes." "I don't understand." Jake was quiet for a moment, as if struggling with how much to tell her. "Sarah, what if I told you that I'm not who people think I am? What if I told you that I came to Cedar Ridge for a specific purpose, and that purpose involves catching the real criminals. Sarah's mind raced. Are you saying you're some kind of lawman? I can't give you details. Not yet. But I need you to. Trust me. Can you do that? Sarah looked into his eyes, trying to see the truth there. Everything logical told her she should not trust this mysterious stranger. But her heart was telling her something different. Be my woman tonight, Jake said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. Not some proper Boston lady, not your father's obedient daughter. Just be yourself, the real Sarah Mitchell. Be with me. Sarah looked away, her heart racing. The intensity in his voice, the raw need she heard there, frightened and excited her at the same time. She had never been propositioned so directly, so honestly. And she had never wanted anything as much as she wanted to say yes. But even as her body responded to his nearness, her mind filled with doubts and fears. If she gave herself to this man, there would be no going back to her old life. She would be forever changed, forever his, in a way that proper society would never understand or forgive. I can't, she whispered, though every part of her screamed in protest. I don't even know who you really are. Jake stepped back as if she had slapped him. In the moonlight, she could see the pain and disappointment in his face. You're right, he said quietly. You deserve better than secrets and shadows. He started to turn away, but Sarah caught his arm. Jake, wait. Whatever you're involved in, whatever danger you think we're in, please tell me the truth. I can handle it. Jake looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up to her face. The truth is that I'm falling in love with you, Sarah Mitchell, and that's going to make what I have to do a whole lot more complicated. Before Sarah could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching fast. Jake immediately pushed her behind him, his hand moving to his gun. Get back to the house, he whispered urgently. Lock the doors, and don't come out until morning. About you? I'll be fine. Go now. Sarah ran toward the house, her heart pounding with fear and excitement. Behind her, she heard Jake slip away into the darkness, as silent as a shadow. As she reached the porch, she heard the riders pass by the ranch, their horses moving at a gallop toward the hills. Inside her room, Sarah sat by the window, watching and waiting. But Jake did not reappear, and eventually she fell asleep in her chair, dreaming of dark eyes and dangerous promises. Sarah woke at dawn to the sound of shouting and horses. She rushed to her window to see her father and several other ranchers gathered in the yard. Tom Bradley was among them, and all the men looked grim and determined. She quickly dressed and ran outside to join them. Sarah, thank God you're safe, her father said when he saw her. The Johnson ranch was attacked last night. They took everything, cattle, horses, even ransacked the house looking for money. Was anyone hurt? Sarah asked, her heart racing. Old Man Johnson tried to fight them off, Tom answered. He's alive, but barely. Doc Henderson is with him now. Tom's eyes were hard as steel. This has gone too far. We're forming a posse to track these rustlers down once and for all. Sarah felt a chill of fear. If Jake was still in the area, he could be caught up in whatever confrontation was coming. Despite all her doubts about him, she could not bear the thought of him being hurt. Tom, are you sure you know who you're looking for? She asked carefully. Found tracks leading toward Devil's Canyon, Tom replied. And we found something else. He pulled a piece of black cloth from his pocket. This was caught on a fence near the Johnson place. Looks like it came from a black hat. Sarah's blood ran cold. Jake always wore a black hat, but so did many men. In the territory, still she could see the suspicion in Tom's eyes and knew he was thinking the same thing she was. That could belong to anyone, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Maybe, Tom replied, but we're going to find out. Your father is staying here to protect you and the ranch. The rest of us are riding out within the hour. After the posse left, Sarah found herself alone with her father and consumed by worry. She could not stop thinking about Jake's words from the night before, about danger and secrets, and his claim that he might be able to help them. She also could not forget the way he had looked at her when he asked her to be his woman, the raw longing in his voice. Around midday, a lone rider approached the ranch. Sarah's heart leaped, hoping it might be Jake, but instead she saw a well-dressed stranger in an expensive suit. Her father went out to meet him, and Sarah watched from the porch as they talked in low voices. The stranger handed her father some papers. Even from a distance, Sarah could see her father's shoulders slump in defeat. When the man rode away, her father walked slowly back to the house, his face pale and drawn. "Who was that?" Sarah asked. "That was Mr. Garrett, the representative of those investors I told you about. He came to collect my answer about selling the ranch." Her father held up the papers with a shaking hand. "I signed Sarah. We have 30 days to vacate the property." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. "Father, no, you can't give up our home. I don't have a choice. With the latest losses, we can't make the bank payment. At least this way, we get something instead of losing everything to foreclosure." That evening, as Sarah helped her father pack their most precious belongings, she made a decision that would have shocked her proper Boston teachers. She was going to find Jake Sullivan and get the truth from him, whatever the cost. After her father went to bed, Sarah saddled her remaining horse and rode toward Devil's Canyon. It was a dangerous thing for a woman to do alone at night, but she was beyond caring about danger. If Jake was involved in the rustling, she needed to know. If he was innocent, he might be in terrible danger from Tom's posse. The moon was full, casting silver light across the rocky landscape. Devil's Canyon was a maze of stone formations and hidden caves, the perfect place for outlaws to hide. As Sarah guided her horse carefully along the narrow trail, she heard the sound of voices echoing off the rock walls. She dismounted and crept forward on foot, following the voices to a large cave mouth hidden behind a screen of boulders. Peering around the rocks, she saw a group of men gathered around a campfire. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized several faces from town, including the banker, Mr. Morrison, and the land office clerk. Peters, but it was the man standing with his back to her that made Sarah gasp in shock. Even in the firelight, she could see the expensive cut of his clothes and the arrogant way he held himself. It was Garrett, the man who had bought their ranch that morning. "The Johnson raid was perfect," Garrett was saying. "That should convince me. The last few holdouts to sell. By the end of the month, we'll control every major ranch in the valley." "What about the Mitchell place?" Peters asked. "I already signed the papers today," Garrett replied with satisfaction. "The old man was so broken by his losses that he practically begged me to take it off his hands." Sarah felt sick as the truth became clear. These men had been systematically destroying the ranchers' livelihoods to force them to sell their land. Cheaply. But why? What did they want with all that ranch property? "The railroad survey is complete," Morrison said, answering her unspoken question. "The new line will run right through this valley. Once the railroad company announces the route, this land will be worth 10 times what we're paying for it." "And no one in town suspects?" Garrett asked. "Not a soul. They all think it's a gang of drifters. That Sullivan fellow has been asking too many questions. Maybe it's time to do something about him." Sarah's blood went cold. They were talking about Jake. Whatever his secrets were, he was not part of this conspiracy. In fact, he seemed to be a threat to them. "Leave Sullivan to me," said a voice that made Sarah's heart stop. Tom Bradley stepped into the firelight, and she saw that he was wearing the same black hat that had always marked him as one of the good men of Cedar Ridge. "Tom," Sarah whispered, devastated by his betrayal. The man she had trusted, her childhood friend, was part of the conspiracy that had destroyed her family. "Sullivan's been getting too close to the truth," Tom continued. "I've been feeding him false information, making him think the rustlers are hiding in Dead Horse Gulch. He rode out there this afternoon with some fool notion of catching them single-handed." "Dead Horse Gulch," Garrett frowned. "It's Comanche territory. They don't take kindly to trespassers." Tom smiled coldly. "Exactly. With any luck, Jake Sullivan won't be a problem much longer." Sarah had heard enough. She crept back to her horse as quietly as possible, her mind racing with horror and fear. Jake was riding into a trap, and he did not even know it. The Comanches in Dead Horse Gulch were known to kill first and ask questions later. As she mounted her horse, Sarah realized she faced an impossible choice: She could ride to town and try to get help, but who would believe her? Tom Bradley was the deputy sheriff, and some of the most respected men in town were involved in the conspiracy. By the time she convinced anyone to help her, Jake would probably be dead. Her only choice was to warn Jake herself. But Dead Horse Gulch was 20 miles away across dangerous country, and she would have to ride through the night to reach him in time. Sarah thought of her father's defeated face, of their lost ranch, of all the families who had been ruined by these greedy men. Then she thought of Jake's dark eyes and the way he had asked her to be his woman. Whatever he was hiding, whatever his real purpose in Cedar Ridge, he did not deserve to die in a trap set by the very corruption he seemed to be fighting. She turned her horse toward Dead Horse Gulch and urged it into a gallop. The night wind whipped her hair loose from its pins, and for the first time since returning from Boston, Sarah felt like the wild ranch girl she had once been. She was riding through the darkness to save the man she was beginning to realize she loved, and nothing else mattered behind her. The lights of Cedar Ridge grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. Ahead lay 20 miles of treacherous country, hostile territory, and a man who might be her salvation or her destruction. But Sarah Mitchell was done being careful and proper. Tonight she was going to discover exactly who she really was, and what she was willing to risk for love. The moon lit her way as she rode harder than she had ever ridden in her life, her heart pounding with fear and determination. Somewhere ahead, Jake Sullivan was riding into mortal danger, and she was the only one who could save him. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure, as her horse's hooves drummed against the hard-packed earth. Sarah realized that no matter what happened in Dead Horse Gulch, her life would never be the same again. She was no longer the obedient daughter or the proper Boston lady. Tonight, she was a woman riding through the darkness to claim her destiny, whatever the cost. Sarah's horse was lathered with sweat and breathing hard when she finally reached the entrance to Dead Horse Gulch just before dawn. The narrow canyon was shrouded in morning mist, and she could hear the sound of water running over rocks somewhere. In the depths, her heart was pounding, both from the hard ride and from fear of what she might find. She dismounted and led her horse carefully into the canyon, trying to move as quietly as possible. The walls rose high on either side, blocking out most of the early morning light. Every shadow could hide danger. Every sound could mean discovery by hostile Comanches. After what felt like hours of careful progress, Sarah heard voices echoing off the canyon walls. She tied her horse to a stunted tree and crept forward on foot. Around a bend in the canyon, she saw a sight that made her blood run cold. Jake Sullivan sat with his back against a large boulder, his hands tied behind him. 3 Comanche warriors stood nearby, their faces painted for war. One of them held Jake's gun, examining it with interest. From their gestures and the tone of their voices, Sarah could tell they were deciding his fate, and the discussion did not look favorable for Jake. Sarah's mind raced. She was one woman against 3 trained warriors, with no weapon except a small derringer her father had insisted she carry for protection. But she could not just watch Jake die, not when she finally understood how much he meant to her. An idea formed in her mind, desperate and dangerous, but perhaps their only chance. She remembered stories her father had told her about Comanche customs, about their respect for courage and their belief in signs and omens. Sarah took a deep breath, stepped out from behind the rocks, and walked boldly into the clearing where the warriors held Jake prisoner. The Comanches spun toward her in surprise, their weapons instantly ready. Jake's eyes widened in shock and horror. "Sarah, what? Get out of here," Jake shouted, struggling against his bonds. But Sarah ignored him, walking straight toward the leader of the Comanche band. She had recognized him from her father's descriptions. It was Red Wolf, a chief known for both his fierceness in battle and his fairness in judgment. "Great Chief Red Wolf," Sarah said in the few words of Comanche she had learned from a Mexican ranch hand years ago. "I come to claim this man as mine." Red Wolf's eyes narrowed as he studied her. He spoke rapidly to his companions, then turned back to Sarah. To her relief, he answered in English. White woman speaks our tongue. How do you know Red Wolf? Father is John Mitchell. You knew him when he first came to this land 20 winters ago. He speaks of Red Wolf as a man of honor. Red Wolf nodded slowly. Mitchell, yes, I remember. He showed respect for Comanche ways. But this man, he gestured toward Jake, came into our sacred place carrying guns, like all the others who would steal our land. He is not like the others, Sarah said firmly. He came here because he was tricked by his enemies. They sent him here hoping you would kill him for them. You speak for him as his woman? Red Wolf asked. Sarah felt Jake's eyes burning into her. She knew that her answer would change everything between them, would bind her to him in ways that proper society would never understand or forgive. But she also knew it was the only way to save his life. I speak for him as his woman, she said clearly. Red Wolf studied her for a long moment, then looked at Jake. This woman risks much for you. She rides alone through the night, faces warriors who could kill her, claims you before the spirits. Of this sacred place, do you accept her claim? Jake's eyes never left Sarah's face. She could see the amazement and love there, but also concern for what she was risking. I accept her claim, he said quietly, if she will have me. Red Wolf nodded and spoke to his warriors in rapid Comanche. They began untying Jake's ropes while the chief turned back to Sarah. The spirits have spoken through your courage, White woman, but your man must still answer for bringing weapons into our sacred place. He will leave his guns here and go in peace. If he returns with weapons, he dies. Agreed, Jake said immediately, flexing his freed hands. Red Wolf looked between them one more time. You are bound now by Comanche law as well as white law. Honor this bond or face the anger of the spirits. The warriors melted away into the canyon shadows as silently as they had appeared, leaving Sarah and Jake alone in the morning mist. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Jake stepped toward her, his eyes full of wonder. Sarah, what you just did. You saved my life, but you also bound yourself to me in ways you might not understand. I understand more than you think. Sarah replied, I heard Tom and the others talking last night. I know he sent you here hoping the Comanches would kill you. I know about the land conspiracy, about the railroad, about everything. Jake's expression grew grim. Tom Bradley is working with them? Sarah nodded and told him everything she had overheard. As she talked, Jake's face grew darker with anger. I should have seen it, he said when she finished. Tom was always there. When I needed information, always ready to point me in the wrong direction, he played me perfectly. Jake, who are you really? What's your real purpose here? Jake was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to tell her. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. My name is Jake Sullivan, but I'm not a drifter looking for ranch land. I'm a detective working for the railroad company. They hired me when they started getting reports that someone was systematically buying up land along their planned route using information that should have been confidential. Sarah stared at him. You're a detective? The railroad company suspected they had? A leak in their organization? Someone selling rude information to land speculators? They sent me here to find out who was behind it and gather evidence. And did you? Jake smiled grimly. Thanks to you, yes. Now I know it's not just one corrupt official, but a whole network involving the local banker, land office clerk, and deputy sheriff. They've been stealing cattle to force ranchers into bankruptcy, then buying the land cheap before the railroad announcement drives up prices. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Can you stop them? Can you get our ranch back? I can try, but it won't be easy. These men have covered their tracks well, and they have the law on their side. Jake reached out and touched her face gently. Sarah, are you sure you want to be involved in this? It's going to be dangerous? Sarah thought of her father's defeated face. Of all the families who had lost their homes and livelihoods to these greedy men, then she thought of the promise she had made to Red Wolf. The bond she had claimed with this man who had risked his life to bring justice to their valley. I'm already involved, she said firmly. And I meant what I said back there. I claimed you as mine, Jake Sullivan, and I don't take that lightly. Jake's eyes darkened with emotion. Sarah Mitchell, you're the bravest, most amazing woman I've ever met. When this is over, when we've brought these criminals to justice, I want to marry you properly. I want to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of what you did for me today." When this is over, Sarah agreed, then stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed it would be. Jake's arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a moment the dangerous world around them disappeared. There was only the two of them, bound together by courage and love and the promise of a future they would fight to protect. When they finally broke apart, Jake smiled at her with that dangerous grin she had come to love. "Ready to go catch some criminals, Mrs. Sullivan?" Sarah laughed, feeling wild and free and completely alive. "Lead the way, husband mine." They walked out of Dead Horse Gulch together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever dangers awaited them. Behind them, the sacred canyon held their promise to the spirits. Ahead of them lay a town full of corruption and a fight for justice that would test their courage and their love. But Sarah Mitchell had finally discovered who she really was. Not a proper Boston lady or an obedient daughter, but a Western woman, strong enough to fight for what she believed in and brave enough to claim the love she wanted. Whatever came next, she would face it with Jake Sullivan by her side, and that was all she needed to know.